Hello, welcome to another episode of American Dish. Thank you so much for being here. Today, we are talking to a very special guest. We are going to hear from the food industry. So, we have Melissa Hockstad, the president and CEO of the Consumer Brands Association, sort of better known inside and outside DC as CBA. That is the trade group that represents kind of the consumer packaged goods industry. So, not just the food industry, but also like personal care manufacturers, household products. It really is sort of the umbrella association that oversees that industry. My understanding is this is actually the largest manufacturing industry in the U.S. in terms of the amount of jobs that it includes, and it's I don't know more than $2 trillion. It's a big part of the American economy. So Melissa and I get into this moment that the food industry is in. And I think you'll notice throughout the conversation, I'm always trying to sort of get her to take us behind the curtain and let us inside and really try to understand how food companies are thinking about this really difficult moment they're in. They have the Make America Healthy Again movement, really crying out and saying that the status quo is unacceptable, that diet related diseases are too high, and really pointing a lot of fingers at the food industry. I mean, I've been in the room many times when HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. straight up says the food industry is poisoning us. And so I really kind of press Melissa on this. Like, what is it like to be in this moment? And I think you'll hear from her responses is that I think you'll kind of take away or notice that it is a really tense time for the food industry. And I think in a way we kind of are seeing unfold like some difficulty in trying to figure out how to respond to this moment. Like, we don't see a ton of really vigorous pushback from the industry in this moment, which is sort of interesting. Anyway, I think Melissa has a really interesting background. She used to lead the American Cleaning Institute, which is the trade association that represents like the cleaning product supply chain. She led that group for 8 years before she took the helm at CBA. And she was there when we had like the great hand sanitizer and like cleaning product insanity that happened during COVID. So she certainly has experience leading an industry through crisis, but it's interesting to hear from her. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Thank you, Melissa, so much for being here on American Dish. It's wonderful to have you. I'm sorry it's still winter in DC, though. We were just talking about how cold it is and how tired we are of the winter.
Well,
Done.
and I was thinking, I can't believe it's already been a year plus since you and I first met at the Ag Ball inauguration, and you
Yes.
feel how much has changed, but I'm with you. I'm ready for spring.
That feels like a lifetime ago. That was
Yes.
also winter.
Yes.
So for those of you who are not aware, the Washington area has had a really bad winter. It was so awful. We had snowcrete, which is I learned is just snow that freezes into basically concrete and can't be removed for a
It
month, basically.
it took a while and a lot of strength to try to chip it away.
So we're looking forward to spring. We're looking forward. Before I get into that, I do want to go back a little bit because I want to give the listeners of this podcast a little bit of story arc, a little bit of the backstory on CBA. So if anyone has not been following this forever, Consumer Brands Association is the modern trade association that represents the CPG industry. But I first started covering this trade association back when it was called the Grocery Manufacturers Association, or GMA. GMA for many, many years was sort of considered the tip of the spear of the food industry primarily. It would often get called big food, like it was sort of the big sort of umbrella food industry group. And 10, 15 years ago, there was this really big kind of split in the industry over how to deal with things like, there were big fights over mandatory GMO labeling. There were big fights over nutrition. And, the Obama administration wanted to label added sugars and reduce sodium. And there was just division within the industry on how to deal with these things. So a lot of food companies left. There was a lot of drama. I think the industry group itself shrank and then had a new leader, rebranded into CBA, and kind of widened the lens to be more CPG focused. So that includes like more personal care products, cleaning products, like it sort of widened what the group was. And then there were a few years and this was before you got to CBA, but there were a few years where the past leader actually said, like, we're not going to really work on nutrition and these food issues. We don't really have as much consensus on these issues. And so there were a couple years that I didn't really cover CBA actually because I cover food policy and the industry was much more focused on like trucking issues and sustainability and supply chain and these other kind of more logistical issues. But then food issues started, like, becoming more like, food policy became more of a hot topic in Washington. This actually does predate the Trump administration. During the Biden administration, we had, the White House Conference on Food. There was more interest on trying to do more on nutrition, and so what I saw was CBA definitely pivoting back more to working on kind of traditional food policy. And that kind of is just to give a backstory of, like, this has been a bit of a journey, like, in terms of how a trade association is representing the food industry, and I've watched this story play out as, like, the food industry is really trying to figure out, like, how to navigate the various, like, moments of change that we're in. So that brings us to present. You have been running a CBA for a little over a year now.
Right.
And you come from, the American Cleaning Institute. You had a long tenure there. How did you get this job? Like, how did you end up leading the food industry? And maybe just start by telling us a little bit of, like, how you got to this position. There are probably some people who are like, "This job sounds hard." Like, why did you do this? How did you end up in this role? And, like, I guess maybe tell us a little bit about your, like, origin story.
Sure. So my background is pretty unique for someone who's in Washington, D.C. So I didn't start out on Capitol Hill. I actually started out as an engineer working for a large manufacturing company. So think hard hat, steel toed boots. I actually had a license to operate a forklift. And I worked in research and development, and my role was basically a recipe writer. So I
Oh,
was working on recipes for new products, and it ranged from ingredients and products for infant car seats. Making sure that as you take this product, you make the car seat. If you got an accident, you want to make sure the child is safe. I also created recipes for food packaging, which again, making sure the food when it's being transported or if it accidentally gets knocked off the grocery store shelf, it stays protected. So I worked on that for several years, and it was really exciting just to see from the absolute beginning how ideas and concepts on a piece of paper turn into products that are used for things that we buy every single day. So I did that for several years, and then I made the transition to Washington to work for my first trade association. It was in the manufacturing space. What I really like about trade associations, it's a way for companies in an industry to get together, work on common issues. And so I worked for several manufacturing trades. And as you mentioned, the last 8 years before I joined Consumer Brands, I ran the American Cleaning Institute. So organization that represents the companies who make all the cleaning products in your house or in your office and all the ingredients. And it was a great opportunity, and what was wild is this was during the COVID pandemic as well, and we
yeah.
went through this plan where probably not a lot of people thought about cleaning products until you really needed the cleaning
Yeah.
products, and it really brought this attention forward to the importance of the industry and keeping people safe, keeping them healthy, and it was a great experience, and, as you know, when you go to the grocery store, the cleaning products section, it's a part of the grocery store. Well, then I got a call about the opportunity here at Consumer Brands and thinking about going from part of the grocery store to really representing the entire space. And being a manufacturer, from a whole career standpoint, what really caught my attention was being able to represent the CPG industry, which is the largest manufacturing sector by employment. Folks might
Mhm.
not know that.
Yeah.
22.3 million Americans. Putting it in context, 3 times the size of the population of New York City. So, people doing really important work every day and the importance that we play just in the overall economics, contributing $2.3 trillion dollars to the GDP. So you're right. I mean, it's tough, it's fun, it's interesting. But what I love is it mixes my love of manufacturing for my love of food, beverage, household, personal care, and being able to bring it all under one roof has just been something I've truly enjoyed since I joined last year.
Yeah, I think people don't realize how big the food industry is. Like, it's really big, and, I often am, like, on my little soapbox about how the food space needs more coverage, like, food policy, and it's amazing to me that it doesn't get or hasn't gotten as much attention because it is such a massive part of the American economy, and then obviously it's like our health and, our food security and national security. There's just so much wrapped up into it. Like,
Which is
I
why I'm
don't
always
know.
thankful
Yeah.
for Food Fix, getting, a couple times a week, the latest information that we
Yeah.
need to know because as you say, this is so important. It
Yeah.
impacts all of us.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's crazy. I wish there were, like, so many more outlets focused on food policy. I, like, welcome it, and I will probably die still advocating for more food coverage. Yeah, I think it's undercovered. So, yeah, let's talk about sort of the current moment the food industry is in. I mean, there's no question the food industry is under a lot of pressure. This administration really likes to beat up on so-called big food. They like to there's just some really stark rhetoric. Like, I have been in the room many times when Secretary Kennedy has said we're being poisoned by the food supply. And, we've all seen, did you see the Twinkie thing that HHS
No,
Secretary posted recently? Okay, well,
I
I'll
have
fill you.
not.
So
Okay.
he posted an AI video, maybe yesterday or the day before. So we're recording this ahead of time, but you can go find it. He likes to post AI videos, and he posted an AI video of himself shirtless in jeans, very on brand, wrestling a Twinkie? Like slamming, like WrestleMania kind of. I'm not familiar with all the terms, but, the message, the vibe is very, like, anti, like, food industry or processed foods, right? Like, they're really coming at this hard. What is this moment like within the industry? Like, what do you hear from your members when stuff like that comes out, or the Super Bowl ad, or what, there's plenty of examples of it, but, like, what is it like leading the industry in this moment, and how do you hear from your members? Are they like, "What is going on?" Or are we just sort of used to it at this point?
So I would say first and foremost, one of the things that I know you and I both know, and it's always so important to stress, is we have one of the safest food supplies in the world, and that's something we don't take for granted at all. When I talk with our CEOs and our members, what's always most important to them is our products are safe. We really focus on science is at the heart of everything that we do, and also the importance of choice, affordability, and availability collectively. And with this administration, I almost look at it as when you're small and every year you got a new teacher. And you have to figure out, okay, the new teacher has a new style, a new way of doing things. And for us, what was really important with this administration is focusing on constructive engagement. We may not agree on everything, but where are the areas that we can come together and work together? Because that's really important for us. Now, as a trade association, yes, we have a wide range of voices. And what's really resonated with our members, I'll call it the three C's. One is being really clear on what we focus in on as a collective industry. Number two is making sure we really collaborate because we're so much stronger working together. And then the third area is that commitment. And again, commitment to what we do for the people who buy our products, who make our products, who use our products, and that focus on the 3 Cs, I really think has helped us be clear on where we're gonna work and why.
Are you finding that there is common ground, like, with the administration, like, places where you can work to be like, "Okay, well, you are saying avoid ultra-processed foods." That's what they're saying, in the dietary guidelines, but where are those, like, places where you're finding more engagement or, like, I guess, common ground?
One big area I would say is absolutely around transparency. And this is a space where the CPG industry has really been at the forefront for years before this administration was in place or before there really was an increased conversation around transparency. And as an industry, it's everything from initiatives like Facts Up Front, the quick little snapshot of information you can get on a product to give you
Yeah,
information about
yeah,
you. 'Cause you
yeah,
don't need to
explain
think
what that
about.
is. So,
Sure.
explain what that is for
Okay.
consumers may not fully recognize what that is.
Yes. So when you pick up a product and you look on the front, and there's a little, basically a label that will give you information such as how many calories are in the product or how much sodium is in the product, that quick little 4 or 5 bits, it's like the snapshot. That is what Facts Up Front is. And then there's people like me, the scientists at heart. I want more information than that. And so we have the program Smart Label. So over 100,000 different products in the grocery store. It's a QR code. So you can just scan the QR code. And if you want more details about not only the ingredients in a product, but tell me what those ingredients actually do. That higher level of detail. We really focus on providing consumers with the information that they need to make the right choices for themselves or their families. And I would say it's not just in the food and beverage space. This is something when I was at the American Cleaning Institute several years ago, we started seeing consumers, they want more information. Tell me what's in my cleaning products. What are the ingredients? How do they work? And so transparency has been in something that's important to the CPG space. We know it's really important to the administration and Secretary Kennedy. And that's a perfect example of, okay, where can we work together to really make sure consumers have what they need?
Yeah, and that's a voluntary initiative that I don't remember if it was
It's
GMA that
voluntary, but
launched it. It's been a while.
it,
Yeah, but a
it's
a
been a
lot
while,
of
but it has really good uptake and continuing to get more companies engaged and involved.
yeah, I think it's really common to see it on, like, the front of cereal boxes, so people might have seen, like, they're like little bubbles that are on the
Yes,
bottom right-hand corner usually,
right.
and I think adoption has been a little bit uneven. I'm not sure what the latest figures are, but certain categories, it seems like, have really leaned in and, like, many of the products have them, and then there's other ones where it's less common, but
And we're
certainly
continuing
sun
to yes, absolutely. I always look at it, there's the continued opportunity for growth, but we are seeing more companies stepping up, and that for me, I think is really exciting because again, they know their consumers are asking these questions, so how can we make the information available and easy to understand?
Mhm. Did you see, like, the seeds of MAHA kind of forming when you were representing the cleaning products industry? Like, you mentioned, like, consumers want more information, but did you sort of see this, like, growing concern about certain chemicals or ingredients forming before you reached the food industry? I mean, it has been brewing for a while, but I'm just, like, curious if you saw those threads already.
Yeah, I would probably say during the COVID pandemic, that's where we started seeing more questions being asked.
Yeah.
And it was much more in the vein of, help me understand, help me understand what are these ingredients? Help me understand what do they actually do? And so that's where I started seeing companies again in the more in the cleaning product space saying, okay, how can we make the information's available, but how do we make it in a more digestible format so you, the consumer, have your questions answered and then can determine, well, do I want to choose product A or product B? So I think it was about 5, 6 years ago, I started seeing more questions being asked. And what I love about the companies that I get to work with, they're like, yes, okay, how can we help? How can we make this information available and answer your questions? So it's
Yeah.
been a few years and every year it keeps growing.
Yeah. I do think that trend probably continues in some form, I don't know what, but it does feel like it's sort of been slowly growing, and maybe the pandemic was kind of an accelerant on a lot of these trends. I don't know, I'm sure it was crazy during your time. So you were there during, like, the hand sanitizer boom when everyone was making hand
Hand
sanitizer?
sanitizer, people trying to find the wipes and the products.
Oh,
And
yeah,
I
I
think
remember
what
that. They were, like, out in a lot of places.
or they'd be on the shelf and they were gone in about a minute. So I think what I appreciated with the companies I worked with back then, their folks stepped up. I mean, they were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There were new facilities that were being built in record time because the companies knew the critical role that they were playing, again, to keep people healthy, keep them safe, deal with, at the time, what was this very unknown, weren't quite sure what was happening here. And I think that for me is what I really appreciate about the CPG industry more broadly. Consumers, but people are at the heart of absolutely everything that we do. And you can just feel that. And when I go out and I talk with companies and I meet with the employees and they're proud of what they do, they're proud that people will go to the store, take their product off the shelf and say, I know this product is the right choice for me. I know this company cares about quality and safety. And so, again, jobs can be tough, but that's something to be exceptionally proud of. And I'm really proud of the work that our companies do.
Yeah, do you find, though, that your members are they, like, confused about the rhetoric they're hearing? Do they get mad about it? I mean, I think one of the things that I've really noticed covering all of this is that a lot of individual companies seem to be like, "Oh, I don't wanna get I don't wanna engage on this," right? Like, we have a cabinet member saying these things. We have a lot of research coming out on ultra-processed foods and, like, links to poor health outcomes, and so it feels like this sort of what is the role of individual companies? But I'm curious, what do you hear from your members when things like that happen? I mean, they're hearing it probably on, like, a weekly basis at this point, but you mentioned, like, people who work in the industry are really proud of their work, so, like, how does that dynamic play out internally?
Well, one of the things that's really fun with the companies I get to work with, right? These are the iconic brands, the products that people choose, the brands that they trust. And we have companies that I get to work with every day that are 50 years old, 100 years old. Actually, I have a member company over 200 years old. So clearly through those cycles, right, you're dealing with the ups and downs of what could happen at any given time. Where I've definitely seen our companies leaning in are telling the stories about the importance of processing plays a critical role in the safety of our food supply. That's not something that we should be ashamed of. We should be really talking about whether it's nutrient retention or making sure whether you live in the heart of Washington, D.C., like I do, or you live in rural Alaska, you have access to these products. And the other thing I always think about as well is I've got a good friend of mine who has really severe allergies. And she's got gluten allergies, nut allergies, and it's processed foods that allow her to safely have the food she needs, life or death type situations. And so with our member companies, they have these great stories. They are continuing to talk about them. And the other thing that I also have really found great part about this job, I travel the country, I meet with CEOs, and it always goes back to people. So last year, I was out visiting with a company that was celebrating its 50th anniversary, and they got started. It was a husband and wife, no joke, literally selling their products out of the back of a VW van 50 years ago. And now they're a product that you can find in any store across the country. And what the founder of the company got to talk for a few hours, and he was telling me, again, it goes back to that commitment to people, the people at his company who are making the product, the communities where they operate, and the consumers who buy it. And so many of our companies like this one, they're global. And what he was talking about with me was number of their ingredients are what we would call unavailable natural resources. So can't find them in the US, they're in more rural places around the globe. And he talked about how with his company where they operate, the importance of community projects, building schools and making sure in some communities that don't have clean water, things can be established to do that. And as he said, we're all part of this global world. We all play an important role. And for me, that's what I've enjoyed and appreciated seeing the companies telling those stories. And even during tough times, we play an important role, not just here in the US, but around the globe. And that's something that, again, you can sense the pride when we talk with our companies and even with me. I mean, just really love this industry.
It sounds like what you're saying is, like, some of these brands and companies have, like, been through a lot, and they're sort of maybe less phased by the current pressures. Certainly if you're, like, a brand that's been around for 100 or more years, I
We've
could
seen a
see
lot.
that. We've seen a
Yeah.
lot. You've seen a lot. You've been through. Um, how do you find consensus in the industry on, how to approach things or what to focus on? I mean, just I kind of laid this out in the Cliff Notes arc of the trade association at the beginning, but so much of the, I think, struggle of the food industry over time, over the time that I've covered the industry, has been like really the difficulty of finding consensus on how to respond to things, whatever they may be, right? It might be some other issue, a tax thing or a tariff issue or whatever. Like it just can be hard. I think people think about the food industry as this monolithic thing, but it's actually really not. It's really decentralized in terms of how many companies, how many brands, and how many players are involved. But like, how do you find consensus? Like, there must be disagreements about like even how to respond to the current moment.
So you work at any trade association, you're spot on how do you reach
Yeah.
consensus because you're representing big companies, small companies, publicly traded, privately held. What I will always advise and what I have found works well, you have to ask a lot of questions. You ask questions and you have to listen to what the members are telling you. But even, one of the dangers of a trade association is you could try to work on a lot of different things. I call it the Frankenstein. Companies ask you to work on this, you add it to your list, and finally you reach your point where you say, we need to take a step back.
Yeah.
And what's really important is number one, always taking the wider view to say, what percentage of our membership is being impacted, whether it's a direct impact or indirect. That just helps you get a little clearer on I can't work on everything, but how does that help me tighten up the list? You're always thinking about time criticality, right? Is this a house is on fire right now? We've got to work on it. Or do we have time? We know it's coming. We just want to be thoughtfully prepared. And then the third thing you're always thinking about is if the organization decides to tackle a particular issue, does it tie to growth and innovation? Are we trying to defend against a challenge? So, in my role as a CEO, I'm always trying to balance those different factors. And the reality is, with a trade association, unity does not always mean unanimity. But what you are trying to do is take off the company hat and think about what will be in the overall best interest of the collective. Sometimes it can be messy, but these are the types of conversations and the roles that trade associations play.
Yeah. I certainly think it's just difficult. Like, a lot of what I've heard from folks in the food industry is just I mean, I think there are disagreements, but then also just, uh, it's not even just disagreements. I think individuals, leaders, and companies are also just struggling with, like, maybe they don't even know what they how they should be responding, right? It's not even that they necessarily have, like, a strong view on, like, what the industry's response should be, but it just strikes me as, like, a challenging moment because I've never seen this level of rhetoric, against the food industry. Certainly, I've covered soda tax fights, and I've covered fights over marketing to kit or these issues that do get pretty heated, but, um, nothing like what we're seeing right now, nothing like the Twinkie, wrestling video, which I should have if I were more tech savvy, I'd figure out how to show it to you on the podcast, but I'm still learning how to do all this. I wanna talk a little bit about, grass reform or the generally recognized as safe issue, because I think this is one that has really resonated within MAHA, this idea that, I think at its core, the complaint is that FDA doesn't have as much oversight over food chemicals as consumers would like, and obviously there's a lot of comparison to Europe, like, you hear that it's really interesting to hear Republicans saying that and, or folks on the right really just being like, "Why is Europe have different ingredients?" Right? There's this really strong comparison that's made, and sometimes people complain about this. The Consumer Brands Association and other industry groups have formed a coalition to try to get Congress to preempt this growing patchwork of state bills. Can you just talk a little bit about where that is right now? I know that there's some attempt to find a co-sponsor. Like, why is that a big deal? It seems like a really big deal for the food industry to get some level of preemption so that you don't have state by state policy, but where does that stand right now?
Yeah, and APHID is definitely so Americans for Ingredient Transparency has been an important area. Just a couple things I know you had mentioned. You're right. Like we often hear, why can I buy this? And why does Europe allow certain things that the US doesn't, or vice versa? The one thing I always like to point out is ingredient allowances are actually quite similar between the two jurisdictions. What's different is the definition of a food additive. And if you look at a similar definition, lists are quite similar. That being said, one of the things that we were starting to see as an industry was the state patchwork last year. Now think about it. Why can I buy something in Virginia that I can't buy, across the border in West Virginia? And with these patchworks, the concern again is always about confusion for consumers. Why is something okay in one jurisdiction or not? We know that there's the risk of increased cost and risks of reduced availability. So, with all of that being said, we really believe in the importance of the federal government stepping up in the leadership role that they have to have consistency across the country. So, if I buy it in Virginia or I buy it in West Virginia, it should be the same. The other thing that really is important for us, and we know affordability is a part of the conversation that's really been increasing over the last year. So there was a study that came out a few weeks ago, and it looked at the states of Texas, Louisiana, and West Virginia, which all three of those have specific state laws in place. And looking at the research and the numbers, it shows a 12% increase in cost in products for those states potentially based on those three states doing their own thing. That's something we don't want to see. We don't want to see this patchwork causing increased costs. And again, it's why we're pushing for the federal approach. So the question of when we will have legislation, hopefully there'll be something very soon. And the philosophy is like, let's get it right versus, having any issues long term.
Yeah, I mean, I one thing I think has been interesting is that affordability argument a lot of industry groups have made at the state level to try to urge these legislatures to not pass these bills, right? They've said, I think, in Texas, retailers and other groups were in Texas saying, if you pass this warning label bill, like it's going to raise costs. And they still passed it with like broad bipartisan support. Do you have any thoughts about like why that warning about increased costs maybe isn't working as well as an argument, even though food costs are going up so much? Like, there just seems to be a disconnect there. I'm not sure why that hasn't landed as much in the States, or do you have any thoughts about that?
I really do think the affordability conversation is something that is landing now. I mean, again, when you even just look in the news, you see it getting picked up, and all of us are consumers, right? We go to the store and we say, "Huh, okay." The
Yeah, well, and
reality is,
especially with the disruptions in oil and fertilizer, like, there's even more
right?
coverage of it right now. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, as you and I both know, ingredient costs go up, transportation costs are going up, packaging costs go up. Even wage growth within the CPG industry has gone up 30% over the last 5 years. So, there's impacts that compound, and our companies are in the value business. They do as much as they can to absorb, but the reality is at some point, some of that will have to get passed to the consumer. So from my perspective, I mean, this is a conversation that's definitely rising. People are starting to feel it a bit more, and again, you see that in the news talked about, "Hey, I got my bills," and costs just generally are going up. So I do think it is landing more, and what's important from the consumer brands perspective is having the data to back it up. It's not just something we're pulling out of thin air, but there's studies that actually are showing this and being able to share that information with a broader audience.
Yeah, it seems that the industry groups I'm not sure CBA's involved specifically in the litigation, but are you guys involved in
The
the
Texas
Texas?
litigation, yes.
You are in Texas, okay.
Yes.
Um, and that has, I think, been ruled, likely unconstitutional. I'm not sure what all the legal journey is from there. And in West Virginia, the synthetic food dye ban has been, blocked temporarily, I think. What are your thoughts on, like, the role that the courts are gonna play? I mean, you have an administration that is, like, pushing really hard rhetorically against the food industry, but we don't have a lot of, like, federal policy. I mean, yes, the dietary guidelines came out, and GRAS reform rule is at the White House being reviewed, and I know a lot of people are weighing in on that, but we haven't seen a lot of policy change. Do you think that the industry is going to continue to, like, focus on the courts to push back on state policy? Because that seems to be getting more traction. I don't know, like, it seems to be kind of playing out in that, arena more so than here in Washington even.
I would say at the state level, I mean, litigation is I always look at it as it's really the last choice that you want to make. I mean, part of
Yeah.
what we look to do, right, is we're lobbying in the states, making sure we're talking with the right people at the state level. However, when you think about litigation, a lot of what it's looking at is were proper procedures being followed.
Mhm.
That's kind of always, I think, a fundamental. The next, when we talk about the state of Texas, for us, it was a First Amendment constitutional right. I mean, really, what was being asked was for companies to put incorrect information on their products as a
Well,
label.
it's the compelled commercial speech thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, that's the role of also of trade associations where we can bring the companies together to work on these issues. I think litigation will continue to be one of the options that are being utilized, but I think it's just one of many tools in the toolbox that could be considered. And for us, again, it always is about that constructive engagement at the highest level. How can we try to figure this out first and together and make sure proper procedures or policies are being followed before we would move to, say, a litigation type approach?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it does seem to be the last resort, but, like, these state policies are passing in a lot of places. I don't know what this year is gonna look like in the States, but we've seen, I think, a surprising level of bipartisan support. Like, I think some of the food policy legislation out of California was, like, unanimous, and you're like, "What?" Like, what is passing unanimously through legislatures? Like, even, really benign random things are not unanimous. So that's been interesting to see. I'm curious about how you're thinking about this conversation around ultra processed foods and like defining them. We know FDA and USDA are working on a definition, and I recently talked to FDA Commissioner Marty McCary about this, and I think Kennedy actually said publicly that they're aiming to have a definition out by this spring, maybe April or May. The food industry has long argued that basically ultra processed foods are ill-defined and that, like, zeroing in on them is maybe misguided. If we are gonna have a definition, I guess, like, what do you think about that? Do you think we will have a definition this spring? How much does that matter? Does it help to just have clarity and know how the federal government's defining these? Or, like, what is the current thinking there?
Well, again, I always lean on got one of the safest food supplies in the world, and processing is complex. And I think what people are looking for is that simple answer, and that's just not realistic. I mean, again, when you take a step back and think about processing, as you and I were talking about, it's really important and serves so many different roles, whether it's addressing harmful bacteria that could be in your product if it weren't processed, or making sure you've got nutrient retention, or again, my friend with the allergy, making sure she's got, quite frankly, the
Allergen
processed food that
free.
she's
Yeah.
right. I mean, so these are all the things, and so just in that kind of sentiment alone, it's complicated. And whenever we're talking about any type of, even just processing in general, we always need to make sure we're also talking about and considering the research that's been done. Is it objective? Is it peer reviewed? Is it relevant to human health and safety? And so there's so many moving factors. I mean, I know to your point, McCary and RFK have said that they're trying to work towards a definition. We just personally, as consumer brands, think it's not suitable for definition. It's very complex. And we also think that there's the risk of unintended consequences. We know how it is. Sometimes you see a statement on a piece of paper and different people interpret it different ways. And so there's just a lot of risk with that. And also, we just can't lose sight of the important role that processing plays in the safety of our food supply.
I mean, I think it's so true that processing plays an important role. I mean, if you just go to the grocery store, like, you can acknowledge that, like, right? There
Hmm.
like, so much of the food supply we have is processed in some way, if it's, like, canned beans or pickles or, I mean, everything, right? Even the, like, baby carrots are processed to an extent. But I do wonder if the industry's, like, saying, that this is basically too complicated to define is I think it's a tough position to defend now because we also see all this research, linking ultra processed foods to this highest level of processing to poor health outcomes. And it feels like, the public health response needs to somehow, it feels like something has to be done about that, right? I don't know what it is, but our diet related disease rates in this country are too high and unsustainable, like fiscally, even if you don't care about the lost health span and, productivity and sort of, like, livelihoods of people, but, I don't know what that is, but it seems like sorting out which foods need to be targeted, what parts of the food environment, how to deal with this holistically. I just don't know how not defining them is gonna work. Like, I don't know. It seems like something has to be done, and to do that, you'd have to figure out, like, zeroing in, what is the actual issue? Because that seems to be what we're struggling with, right? What are we actually talking about when we're seeing these headlines about concerns about ultra processed foods? Is it the yogurt and the whole grain bread and all the thing, I think that's where people go, like, clearly there needs to be a line drawn somewhere. It sounds like the industry's stance here is just that that's not really possible to draw lines, or, like, maybe unpack that more because there's something going on that needs to be addressed, and I'm not sure. I don't know where this is headed, but it seems hard to defend that we can't define it or that it's too hard to do that.
Well, I think it's extremely complicated. And one of the things I do appreciate about the administration in this space is I think fundamentally we're all supportive of shifts towards healthier lifestyles. But what the administration has said is when we're talking about health generally, we need to talk about it, to your point, holistically. The fact we're all on our computers or our iPhones too much. We're not getting enough exercise. Even conversations around access to healthcare, all of these things play a role. And so I think just to target on one specific area doesn't necessarily change all of the other factors of what really goes into an individual's health. And so that's something I think we've heard from Dr. McCary, we've heard from RFK Jr. Again, there's no silver bullet. but you do have to have that holistic conversation. I think for me, that's what matters most is being broad, considering all of the factors involved, and then figuring out, what can we do to get all of us off our iPhones, get us out exercising more? How do all of those factors collectively really play an overall impact on one's health?
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it is we lack the research, honestly. It's like we have a lot of the association, we have a lot of the observational data, right, that says this type of diet associates to poor health outcomes, but actually sussing out which part of it is this food or which part of it is the screen time or which part of it is stress or which part of it is lack of sleep or like, which part of it is socioeconomic, pressure and, like, lack of, safe walking space, play space. I mean, there's so much that feeds into it. I think that's true. Where I'm not sure I just am not sure I don't know how to define ultra processed foods, like, I do not, but or how the government should be defining them. Obviously, we have a definition for, like, research purposes, and that's the NOVA definition out of Brazil, which a lot of people, don't love because it's very inclusive of a lot of foods that probably offer, like, pretty decent nutritional profiles, right? It doesn't consider nutrition, it's only the level of processing. So we have that in the literature, there's something going on, but I'm just not sure that, like, this line will continue to work. I don't know, but I don't know, maybe they're not. I mean, Marty McCary has also said, "We're not sure we can come up with a definite," or he, I think, has said, "It's gonna be hard, and it may not be perfect the first time," or I don't know. He said something along those lines, so it's like, they've kind of acknowledged that they might not get it right the first time.
It's definitely complex, and I think the other thing as an industry, and you know this, right? You go to the grocery store and you see, like, how many different choices there are for orange juice or yogurt or toilet paper. So as an industry, what's always most important to us is making sure consumers have a wide range of choices, right? To make sure you can pick based on, I read the back of read the label, you read the label, but both of us might decide, hey, we want different kinds of yogurt, right? So what's important is how do you give consumers the information they need to make the right choices? How do you provide a wide range of options? And at the end of the day, the individual has to determine what's the best choice for me and for my family. And that's also something that we think about as an industry is, we're always listening to consumers, we're evolving, products evolve, and we want to make sure there is that choice. So you can decide this is what I need and my family can say this is what I need.
Mhm. Well, I mean, that's a good segue to the last thing I wanted to touch on is, front of pack labeling because the Biden just to get listeners up to speed who maybe are not in the weeds like we are, the Biden administration in the very final days issued a front of pack proposed rule, which basically mandated that certain nutrition information would be on the front of packs. And it's similar but different to the facts up front, which we were discussing earlier. So it wouldn't be voluntary, and it would actually flag like it would really focus on added sugars, sodium, and saturated fat, and basically saying whether or not something is high, medium, or low in those three, and focusing on that. But the Trump administration has indicated that they don't really like that overall approach, and yet they're saying they're gonna move forward on front of pack. I'm not sure if that means they'd have to wholly repropose. This is, like, going too far into, like, administrative procedure, but we're not sure exactly how they're gonna do it or what that's gonna look like, but they have indicated that they wanna do something different. Where do you think that's headed? Has the FDA given clarity to the industry on, like, what to expect going forward? Because that front of pack, a lot of folks in public health think that that could help potentially consumers maybe make healthier choices. I don't know that we know exactly how consumers would respond to that, but the hope is that some type of front of pack scheme would nudge people towards healthier choices. But has FDA given the industry any indication of where we're headed there?
So we haven't heard anything specific per se, but to the points that you raise, I mean, obviously it's something that we've heard Dr. McCary talk about. We know it's been in the conversation, both in the Biden administration where they are now. And again, our industry, we're all about how can we be transparent? How can we provide information that consumers can use to make the right choices? And I think what's important, and just when we listen to the conversation from consumers more broadly, there is that interest in give me the information about nutrients to encourage or maybe nutrients to limit. And again, how do we do it in a way that's easy for consumers to understand, for them to evaluate and say, okay, this is going to be the right choice for me or for my family. So I think it's something that definitely will be continued part of the conversation for this year. And this is a perfect example of we as an industry want to continue working with the administration because we're all about how do we help consumers make the right choices.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they approach this because sort of mentioned earlier, like so far from this administration, we've seen so much focus on rhetoric and also the dietary guidelines, which straight up say to avoid ultra or not. It doesn't say to avoid ultra processed foods. I misspoke earlier. It says to avoid highly processed foods. The government doesn't have a definition for
Right.
ultra processed foods. So there's that wrinkle there. So they've said a lot and they've, I think, really encouraged consumers to change their eating behaviors from like the bully pulpit approach. But in terms of policy, we haven't really seen these moves. And the grass proposed rule to change how FDA oversees food chemicals that is moving forward, and then they're saying front of pack is. So these seem like kind of the two things to watch in the short term in terms of, like, policy moves, and I also don't know. So, it kinda makes me feel better they haven't told you either. I don't know that I don't know that it's normal that, like, this close to when they say they're gonna do something, we have so little idea of what they're gonna do, but maybe. I also kind of get the sense that FDA is still figuring this out. I don't know for sure the exact status at this moment, but it does seem like there has been, a lot of deliberation about how the administration wants to do this. I don't think regulation is the first best option or favorite option of generally Republican administrations. Like, it's just, like, ideologically not as aligned, and so I'm not sure where they're gonna go. So on that very honest note about who knows what's coming next,
A lot of
um,
moving parts for
a
sure.
lot there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah, we don't know. But I think it's good to be honest and nuanced about it is an uncertain road ahead in terms of policy and also just in terms of where this conversation is headed. And that's part of why I launched this podcast so that we can have those longer form conversations about it. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today. We'll have to have you back at another time. I'm sure there will be many more chapters in this debate. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. This has been great. A lot going on, a lot to talk about, and always just happy to talk about the consumer packaged goods industry and the role it plays in everyone's lives every day. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to American Dish. Please take a minute to both subscribe and leave a review wherever you're listening. This ensures you never miss an episode, and it helps more people find this podcast. Also, be sure to check out Forked, the food politics podcast I co-host with the Food and Environment Reporting Network. If you're interested in these topics and you're not already getting my weekly newsletter Food Fix, go to foodfix.co and get on the list. It's a must-read for consumers and policy insiders alike, and it's free. Special thanks to Adrian Cruz, who manages this podcast, and my late dad, David Bodemiller, who wrote the music you're listening to well before I was born. We'll see you next time.